welcoming to TheInformer a lawyer, someone who started life as a tax lawyer, but now very much a human rights lawyer, Serene Teffaha.
Yes.
Yeah? And she's here to discuss a class action that you're very much passionate about, and you've been working on for how long?
I've been working on the class action for about 6 months, since the start of the lockdowns.
On the lockdown. So that was the catalyst?
It was definitely the catalyst. It was also the many clients that were coming through the door that had very similar issues they were presenting.
Let's talk about those issues. What were the issues?
Initially, when the lockdown initially occurred, the issues weren't completely transparent. However, I think some businesses became quite aware what was to come. So my business clients were quite scared, of what may be coming, and in fact almost like a premonition of that. Some of them were more clued on. And then there were, of course, the issues that started to transpire once directives started to occur in relation to the aged care facilities directives, which curtailed the visitation hours for elderly people in care facilities.
Which was confronting.
Was extremely confronting, and also people who were being denied entry to access their family and work if they choose not to have the influenza vaccination. Many of my clients had reactions and other things in the past, but the doctors would not.
We're not talking about people gaming the system. We're talking about
legitimate people that but they won't be given exemptions, because all of a sudden the criteria for exemptions went up a notch, and even immunocompromised people were being told you need to take the vaccine, and they don't want to because they know that is actually an issue for them.
They know what's coming.
Exactly.
What could happen.
Yeah, and so there was a complete reaction from aged care facilities on that, denying people entry into care facilities as well as workers.
So what's the direction of the class action? Who are you? What are you asking, and what are you saying?
Yes. So as the time went on, in the past month, there has been now an acceleration all of a sudden in terms of the compromise that people are feeling about their rights. So all of a sudden we had cross-border controls, we had detention, forced detention and hotel quarantine.
Well, there's a reason why we had all of that.
Well,
number of missteps along the way.
Well, there were missteps, but I also don't.
By appropriate controls,
did
create the situation. They're not.
I don't believe that.
No,
I don't. Actually, there's definitely issues with the way that Dan Andrews handled it, but it's just simply one issue out of, I think, hundreds of issues that are coming up. These issues are that there is almost an illogicality that is being imposed in the way that we're dealing with public health issues. All of a sudden, things that are not scientific are being pushed on us as scientific when they're not. We have a body of law that is extremely thoughtful. Okay, this is across both states, territories, and the federal legislature. It's called the Biosecurity Act, and that Biosecurity Act on the federal legislature was a very well put piece of legislation, and it looked at public health risks and how to deal with them. Now, you don't detain people in hotels. Okay, that is not what the Biosecurity Act says. You don't detain them in dingy, stuffy, non-ventilated spaces. Okay, we talk about medical facilities, we talk about appropriate facilities.
And yet we saw that happen.
We saw that, and that is absolutely not something that you do when you're managing public health risks. Secondly, you don't put people in hotel rooms, okay, on a suspicion they have a disease, okay? You need to actually make what is called, under each of these legislative frameworks, a risk assessment, okay? And you need to determine if someone has signs and symptoms. You don't quarantine healthy people. That is not what we do, okay?
That's your assumption, that they were healthy.
No, it's not.
The minute they get on a plane...
Not at all. No, it's not my assumption at all.
They incubate over 2 days on an aircraft coming from a COVID-affected zone, like the United States, or China, or Asia, or Britain, or Europe. As we saw, we'd had 3 or 4 months of a warning that something was coming.
Well, look,
and when we saw the death toll rise in Italy, then in Spain, then in France, and it started to really take hold in America, people, of course, as you can imagine, they were on heightened alert, and you would expect authorities to make something, to take some course of action that would protect the public. That's the idea. Now, you're
It's the
saying
idea.
that's not the case.
Well, what we need to do here is understand the difference between reactionary principles versus principles of science, okay, and principles of perspective, and geography, and analysis, and epidemiology, and all of the scientific principles that don't go out the door simply when we're managing a crisis. We need to analyse and understand. I've had many conversations across the world with many informed doctors.
You speak to Jacinta Ardern?
I haven't spoken to Jacinta.
You should.
No, well, I'll tell you.
She feels very differently about
That's
it.
right. Well, I've spoken to some top epidemiologists and some top minds in the world. German scientist, Dr. Bachdi. I've spoken to virologists, top virologist, Nobel Prize winner. I try to say Giulio Tato.
If I can
just
there for a moment. The problem, it seems to me, and every day seems to bear this out, with every specialist you find, it's a bit like an economist. They all have an opinion.
Well, actually, these specialists are Nobel Prize winners and they're top virologists in their field.
They all have an opinion.
Well, I'll say something. Science, if science...
This is why you have a class action.
Well, actually, I'll explain...
You've got to prove yourself in the court.
Well, interesting. You know, it's interesting when people talk about settled science or sciences being finalised. I do agree that there's always scope for debate and opinion in everything.
And you'll find out the court.
For sure. But I also don't agree when something that is meant to be an objective exercise becomes a dogma. Okay? And what has occurred...
When you introduce emotion.
Yeah, it's true. And so let's take emotion out. Okay? And let's look at facts. Okay? So I'm a fact person. Okay, that's how I win my cases, because I'm a factual finder. Okay, I go, all right, let's have a look what we've got here. We've got now 500 doctors coming out here in Melbourne. I've spoken to a number of experts globally and locally, and what they're coming out and saying, this is not appropriate. What we're doing here, we're overreacting, okay? We're actually creating more ill health. So a lot of issues around delayed access to the medical system, people fearing accessing it. These top doctors, Dr. Jeffrey Wells and many others who've come out, had a beautiful conversation with him. Very informed individuals, okay, who've got 40, 50 years of experience. Between them, they've got hundreds of years. And what they say is this: you are coming at this with a sledgehammer and creating a lot more problems. You want to ensure that you want to deal with abatement of risk, and I'm all for that. But you have to understand certain scientific principles. Firstly, you don't quarantine healthy people. Asymptomatic symptoms, okay, asymptomatic infections have been determined by World Health Organization through 4 randomized clinical trials. This is on their website, that it's 0% to 2.2%. You do not shut entire economies because of a 0% to a 2.2% risk, okay, of infection. Now, secondly, you have to do 2 tests here. You have to ascertain, firstly, how contagious is this risk? We've established it is. The second thing is, what is the effect of contracting it, okay? So the way you respond has to be in accordance with that risk assessment. And we can all agree... Do
you accept those risk assessments are reasonable and fair?
Well, we say, and as the 500 doctors that have just come out now in Australia and say, they say it is not virulent to the extent of creating the significant harm that is anticipated by legislation. So you want to create a reaction to something that is actually been modelled falsely and incorrectly. Now, these models by Ferguson and the like initially that came out have been blown out of the water, okay? I'm very confident we can go to court, and I could show that in a second, okay? But also...
When are you likely to be in the court?
Well, look, I'm working very hard now to collate all the clients. You know, we've had thousands of applications, but obviously it's about getting people over the line, explaining to them. I'm backing myself. No, I'm backing myself in the sense that the clients, okay, so the clients are funding this, and I'm asking for a minimum contribution depending on their ability, okay, so because I don't want to hold it back, access to, you know, I want to open it up to everybody. And I'm also opening up...
What are the chances of getting the decision you want in your favour?
Well, I'm the kind of person that always gets my way. So, I mean, I'm not saying there's always a risk, okay, and corruption is always there. But to be honest, I have a lot of faith in the High Court, okay? I have a lot of faith in our top judges, okay? I have no faith in the lower courts and the Family Court of Australia. I believe they're an entirely different kettle of fish, and they need to be exposed. But the judiciary
might leave that for another time.
We will leave that. Oh yes, I've got a lot to say on perpetrators and pedophiles in this country, but we'll come back another time on that. But in terms of the High Court judges and the top federal court judges, not the appellate function of the Family Court, but the mainstream federal court, I have a lot of respect for those judges, okay? And I do believe that when you put proper principled case, because our case is very principled, it is about the law, it is about the excess of the use of the law, it is the abusive processes that have not been followed throughout all of the implementation. Okay, you don't do hotel quarantines. You know that is just not something that the Biosecurity Act foresees. You want to ensure you mitigate risk. You take the appropriate step. You have proper contact tracing.
And yet, the whole country has followed that regimen, and except for Victoria,
I don't think the rest of the country has.
But one instance in New South Wales with the Ruby Princess ship. Were the two instances where the quarantine there was a major misstep, and we saw a huge flow on of a contagion that both departments at the time struggled to bring under control. And Victoria is still suffering from that challenge of that hotel mismanagement. I can remember a couple of people, friends of ours, who were in the hotel industry and were approached, in fact put their hands up to say, we can assist with the returning travellers. There's an opportunity to raise some money or put some money in the coffers, because they were told to close their business. And when they found out just how little support they were going to get from police and security, they thought, no, this is going to be a basket case, and should anything happen, we're going to be at fault. We don't want to be involved. So they withdrew. And yet a bundle of the others who seriously needed the business happily put their hand up. And then what's transpired? Well, there's an investigation underway.
Well, look, I think
inquiry.
I think
we should have a decision by November.
Yeah. Look, I think there's a number of issues here. There are issues with the Department of Health not being properly trained. I'm talking here about the states and territories. Police officers are not properly trained.
They're not fit for purpose.
Well, they're not fit for purpose. The ADF, the ADF are
they're trained to do.
Correct. The ADF are far better equipped, okay, and far better trained on these levels.
Well, it's the training.
Correct. The training. Now the problem is
they understand orders.
Correct. Well, they understand orders, but they're also medically trained. Okay, so the issues here that I see is that you are applying principles that are incorrect right from the start. You know, as I said, Biosecurity Act looks and assesses risk, it looks at signs and symptoms, and says that only people who have this risk need to then be issued specific orders to tell them what to do, and then you have appropriate contact tracing rules. Victoria did the opposite to any of that, okay? You're putting people in hotel quarantine, you're confining people in these small spaces, you are not assessing risk appropriately, and that you're painting everyone with the same brush, and all of a sudden you have a society that is more focused on quarantining healthy people than actually dealing with risk assessment. And what is very important here, George, very important, is that meanwhile you've ended up hurting the elderly, okay? You've quarantined them for extended periods of time, creating all sorts of stuff with nutritional deficiencies and other issues with making them away from families.
Problems that brought unintended consequences.
Correct.
We have a poorly trained or lower socioeconomic group of young women who've looking for an opportunity to get a job, and they've got a job as an aged care nurse, for example, or as a carer in those facilities, minimum training, and they're not paid nearly enough, so they don't work at just the one aged care facility or nursing home, they work at 2 or 3 or 4. Now, when you start visiting different nursing homes daily, what are the chances then of that contagion spreading?
There's absolutely very
there are a series of unintended consequences.
Correct, but these are very
those original decisions.
But these are very important things. You know, when you have government that is so vested in putting too much energy in closing down businesses and healthy people and neglecting the appropriate processes that should go into the care of elderly, nutritional supplementation, training of aged care, increasing of the wages, the investigation into the privatisation of these spaces, okay, and how they can create a profit incentive, the elderly abuse that already is increased as a result of the alienation and isolation of families. You are not looking at investing in the right things. Now, furthermore as well, we have a lot of good doctors now that are coming out with other alternatives like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and other things that are there as well. All of a sudden, we're going to just put a big cross on any alternative healing. So you've got issues with training of the staff. I'm very passionate as well about the PPE. Yeah, and also very passionate about the PPE. You've got hospitals all around Australia going, where is our PPE equipment? You've got governments more interested in shutting down business than funding PPE for the hospital staff.
Should you be running a class action or should you be running for Parliament?
I've had people ask me to do that. Oh, sorry. I've had people ask me, to do that, and I will consider that in due course. I'm very passionate about human rights. I'm passionate about truth. I'm passionate about fact finding. I'm passionate about the corruption, stamping out corruption in our bureaucracies. It's an outrage. The Labor Party in Victoria...
I can see you biting your lip at the same time. Look, the most exciting thing about this is that I can tell that the passion will allow you to reach a conclusion. You will get to submit that class action. It'll be interesting to see what transpires. The High Court is not an easy place, but as you said, you believe that they're fair men and women.
I do.
Who will take in all the facts that you're going to present, and by that time, how far away do you think this opportunity will be? How long away do you think before you can actually be in the High Court prosecuting your case?
I would really urge business people to join my class action. And my class action is constituted by 2 parts. Yeah. The parts that impact the mums and dads and the families and the rights, the individual rights. Yeah. And then there's a really big part of our class action, and that is business. And what has been very disappointing to me, George, is this, that big businessmen with big money and big wealth who've been impacted are too scared, okay? They're scared to take the right action. It's those men and women, and unfortunately they're predominantly men, I'm urging them to also back me, okay? Because we collectively, if I just have vulnerable people, it does make it that extra hard for me. But if I also have that group of people in the community who are going to rise up, then I can have this done very quickly.
All right, well, we wish you every opportunity.
Let's
see what transpires. Very passionate, Serene Teffaha. And as I said, started life as a tax lawyer. You understand what that means. That means she's a commitment phobe. and when she gets passionate about something, she will not let go. She's now a human rights lawyer. We wish her an opportunity to prosecute her case in the High Court.
Thank you so much. What a lovely interview.